Welcome to Inside Independent Publishing with IBPA. I'm your host, Christopher Locke. I'm also the IBPA Director of Membership and Member Services. Okay, so distribution continues to be one of the most consequential pain points for independent publishers, and with fewer and fewer distributors from which publishers can choose, it seems like major changes need to occur to fix the system. Microcosm Publishing's founder and CEO, Joe Biel, joins the podcast today to chat about the repercussions of the recent closure of small press distribution, why so many independent distributors have shut down, ideas for how distribution can be improved for indie publishers, and much more. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you. It is a pleasure and an honor to be here.
Well, I always love setting up all of those things, and then suddenly you're like, "Oh, I'm gonna solve it all." Okay, sure.
Wait, that's what we're talking about?
Yeah. You're like, okay, I thought we were talking about publishing books. Yes, distribution. Let's do that.
All right, let's do it. So yeah.
Well, first off, I want to say thank you for attending IBPA Publishing University. You did a panel about distribution, and it was excellent, very well received. And so we wanted to dive deeper into that today. So to set the stage, Microcosm Publishing has had traditional distribution. And for anybody listening, that's when you have a sales team that goes out and sells books. It's very different from when you have wholesale distribution, where it's just like literally your books available to like bookstores. Okay, so you all have had traditional distribution in the past, but at a certain point, you all chose not to have it any longer, and you've been successful without it. We're going to dive into this whole topic, this whole episode, but I wanted to see if you wanted to share your general thoughts about why, for Microcosm, it's better not having traditional distribution.
Sure. So in the beginning, like all baby publishers, 28 years ago, we had no distribution. And, you have to kind of figure that out. You have to figure out how to be found by the people that would love your books. That's one of your many jobs. And we actually did apply to small press distribution, and they remain to this day. And I still have the letter. They are the only distributor that has ever rejected us.
Huh.
And that was like my badge of pride. That was like my moment where they told us there was no market for our books. And I had my, oh yeah moment,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like, and it carried me. And, that was a long time ago, but it's things like that are very motivating, or for me, at least, maybe not for everybody, but, and so we went from that to continuing what we were doing, because honestly, that made me realize how much what we were doing was working. We had a lot of independent relationships with independent stores. That was back in the days of, B. Dalton and Borders, and these places were still like market behemoths, but we didn't really worry about that kind of stuff. We didn't put barcodes on our books back then, which,
Wow.
like is a pretty funny like line in the sand to draw. I now can see in middle age, but at that time that seemed important, like that was like part of our branding, and I did once have somebody at a convention cry because somebody suggested to me that we should start putting barcodes on our books and get sold in the chain stores. And, that's just like not who we were then.
Mm-hmm.
And so we signed with our first distributor, NBN, which is National Book Network, way, way back in 2002. So more than 20 years ago. And that was, it was interesting. Like, I don't think it was a bad relationship, but it was just immediately apparent that they basically wanted us to handle or hand over all of our sales to them, and then they would take care of that. And when we were like, well, why wouldn't we just keep doing what we're doing and you would expand that, they kind of pulled the, well, that's not how it works card. And, and you're like, but so what are you off? Then you're just like a fulfillment system, like we already have the sales. And that was an odd thing, and so we went back and we had sort of an amalgamate situation with another small publisher called AK Press, who is in California, and they handled like the big accounts. They handled like Baker and Taylor, they handled Ingram, they handled places that, we didn't have a personal relationship with, like anybody that was too big for that. But then the problem became that we were growing faster than they were. So then we outgrew that, and then we went with another more traditional distributor, and then another more traditional distributor, and
Mm.
another. And, I joke that we did the complete tour, except for SPD, who it remains the only distributor to ever turn us down.
Well, maybe
Um,
one day.
well, now it's too late.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Now we missed our tour can never be complete.
Uh-huh.
But then and then there was a lot of consolidation in the industry over the last 15 years is really when that hit I mean, it started in 89, but it massively accelerated around, 2006. So after all that, my business partner, one day she pointed out that how much of my stress came from like managing the relationship with our distributor. And we had hired a major accounts salesperson in 2016. And her first day on the job, she said, "Oh, why do we even need that distributor? Like, we could do a better job ourselves."
Mm.
And, she's worked in the industry since the 80s. So, like, I took her seriously, and I like dismissed and explained away her ideas. And then a few years later, I realized she was correct,
Ah.
and it was like an amazing moment where, so we approached sales groups and we said, we're considering this move back to being self-distributed. And I thought, as I think just about every publisher I talk to thinks, that that is an impossible, outdated relic of the 1960s,
Mm.
that you could do that. And honestly, I had some relationships with salespeople that are like regional commission sales reps, and so people that sell books for multiple different publishers and have relationships with bookstores, basically like have standing appointments. And so I was able to lean on those relationships and say, hey, am I really off base here? Like, is this as possible as it seems? Like, what do we need to do that? And they were really nice to help me with that. And then one of my mentors from the 90s, she was really nice to help me out, because and again, I was just like, well, how would we, like, is this possible? Like, could we do this? And, because we're obviously at like quite a bit of a larger scale, we were doing like a couple $100,000 25 years ago versus today, like we're doing millions of dollars. And that's like a very different scale as a publisher, as much as it like both of those might sound like pie in the sky huge to
Mm.
some publishers.
Mm.
And then once I found out how easy it was to do our own distribution, I was kind of like, why doesn't everybody do this? It
Mm.
was like it like completely turned my perspective in the span of like 2 or 3 days. And then obviously like the proof is in the pudding, as we say, because our sales more than doubled that first year, which was 2018 to 2019. And then they have like quintupled over the past, let's see, what's that been now? 5 years, six
Mhm.
years?
Mhm. Well, I guess one question I have is, so, these book buyers at these retail stores, bookstores, I mean, they only have so much time, and there's thousands of, independent publishers. So, I know it works for you all, but, one of the reasons it's helpful to just have like the traditional distributor is you just have that person, that one person that then represents all these different publishers and they meet. So how do we scale that? Like, how do these people just have time to meet with all of these indie publishers?
Fantastic question. So, part of that is this is how discoverability actually works in practice, is that a lot of these stores are in out of the way places,
Mm.
or, like, for example, no salesperson visits North Dakota.
Mm.
It's just like the costs and the numbers are not there.
Mm.
And similarly, lots of complaints from Oklahoma bookstores, middle of the country, great distances, etc. And so, it does seem that your point is valid, that it's easier, obviously, to have fewer, people to meet with, fewer salespeople. But the reality is that, you're, as was explained to me by sales reps for these distributors, they're like, we signed a new publisher. That takes me from sometimes having 6,000 new books that I have to present for that
Mhm.
season to 7,000 new, and there's just no way to do that.
Mm.
Like, it's impossible. And even the like most well-wishing salesperson is outdone by the buyer's attention span. So like you're literally getting split seconds as you're like flipping through a catalog, and then sometimes the buyer just doesn't know the books because how could, or the salesperson could not possibly be familiar with that many titles.
Mhm.
And so honestly, the funnier part is that the major choke point for an independent bookstore to manage all these different accounts is in the payables. So like paying their invoices, paying the debts to the independent publishers,
Mhm.
that often the real excuse they give is, I just don't have time to manage one more set of outgoing checks every month.
Mm.
But there's good news, is that there's a brand new company in the UK called Batch that actually literally solves that problem, and that's their one job.
Mm.
They're a plug and play service, and they're run by a organization like the IBPA in the UK.
Mm.
So they're not a for-profit software company.
Mm.
They're literally just a way for independent bookstores to pay publishers.
Mm.
So and it's not automated, but it's like you hit the button and you pay Microcosm. And we were the fifth publisher to sign up for that service, which has only gone into the US in the past year. So that's like pretty great. So like it was like we were as early as the big five were, or I guess we were
Wow.
before some of the big five.
Wow.
I don't know which ones specifically, but that was kind of shocking to me, that that is the gap. And then, the other thing is that an independent bookstore, they want they want their store to have character, they want to be unique, they want to show off like cool books that like that's the whole value proposition of their store, is that you go there to learn about new things. You're not just buying the like Prince Harry memoir or whatever,
Mm.
and so the other part of this, and this is the thing that I've been pushing since literally 2008, is this idea that, you know, the publishers know their books better than anybody, and the publishers love their books more than anybody possibly could. And so, the idea that you could work together with other small publishers to be better at the marketing and sales side of things, to get the word out, even just something really simple like mailing postcards to stores, like these are the new books, this is how you order them, this is how, and it's often made to appear more complicated than it needs to be because of how consolidation has forced the hand of the industry, and I don't know that it needs to be. And I feel like that's the thing that really appeals to me about the IBPA, is that your members are the ones that are like, convention is not my concern here. My
Mhm.
concern is that I want people to know and love my books the way that I do.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. Well, one thing I wanted to understand, because you just brought this up. So bookstores have a certain amount of shelf space, and they can't they want to make sales, and I think there's this big push and pull where I do think they would like to support independent publishers more, but I think there's that fear as well where the big five publishers have well-known authors, they have huge budgets to market their books so that they have the books everybody's talking about, because literally they just, like you were saying, the Prince Harry book or something, where it's like it's just something that is in all the magazines everywhere. So I think there's this problem where these indie bookstores they are taking somewhat of a risk to taking a book no one's ever heard of before and hoping that someone, will walk in the store and go, "Oh, I'm going to buy that one," versus having a shelf full of the number one bestsellers on the New York Times best list. So what are your thoughts about all that?
So, I mean, yes and no. A lot of that stuff, the big five probably controls a disproportionately large amount of shelf space in most bookstores compared to even like their market share in the industry. Just because that's the low-hanging fruit, those stores are what's known to them and what's available. But so what happens is that they have these outrageous budgets. One of my morning meetings, a store told me that she had a life-size poster overnighted to her for a book that they had never even ordered a single copy of to arrive in her store on release day, which, she promptly like recycled because she's like, I don't need this. I don't have anywhere to put it. Like that's the kind of like waste that you're dealing with the big five. But it's like, this is the strength of the independents is like, they're never going to do something so silly, like
Mhm.
they have to make their dollars and their cents count. And, they have to make sense. So it's like when you have a book and you can develop the book in the cover to explain the book's value proposition, and you can explain it to the buyer and explain to them like what the local sales handles are for them, they're going to order the book, and they're going to take a chance on it because that's ultimately like what makes their store more interesting. The reason that the big five have such a disproportionate handle on these bookstores is because it's such an obvious place to sell books.
Mhm.
So, but that doesn't mean, the industry operates on returnability, subject of much malign, but so the big five really lean on that where they oversell and then get these massive return ratios. So that's part of it too, where if you're smarter and more efficient, like our returns are less than 2% for the year, where we currently hover like around 1.5% of the books that we ship are returned to us. So like that's pretty fantastic, I feel like, in proportion to what a big five or any distributor we've ever had did with our books.
Mhm.
So it's partly about being more targeted with that, and that helps, I think, for a lot of it helps the store to not have to buy in return, and it helps the publisher to be more focused. So I don't know, I think there's solutions there, and a lot of it is just like sort of knowing who your reader is and knowing why they care about your book.
So then one of the ways indie publishers can help bookstores is just it's that initial sale to them, why that particular bookstore is perfect for that book. Are there any other things that indie publishers can do to help make their books more appealing to a bookstore that might be averse to like, wanting to take a chance?
Being less precious about the cover, the design, the development of the book. I mean, honestly, and that's, I get it that this is emotionally difficult, but honestly, like having everything explained in the way that the book looks, then you won't need to hand sell every copy because the book does the walking for you. It
Mm,
walks right into the customer's hand and then it walks out the door. So, like if you think about it that way, and then, you don't have to do, you can and should look as good as any big five book when you're an
mm,
independent publisher. Like there isn't really a reason not to. And I get it. It's often that people don't think in those terms, that you have to tell people what the book is about because they're inundated with, the 20 million other books in print. So if they're not familiar with it, you don't want to make that hard for them. You want to make that as easy as humanly possible by sight that they can say, "Oh, I get it. Yes, we have customers that are interested in that." And
mm.
then when the customers come in, the booksellers can throw an anecdote about like how cool it was to meet you and things like that. And then the person reading the book feels like they get a value add because they're like, "Oh, this is a cool independent publisher. It's not like one of the big guys."
Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned book returns, and that is a huge issue for publishers, especially indie publishers. So I wanted to get your thoughts on how we can resolve this. It sounds like because you're in control of selling to these different bookstores and book, retailers and all that, it makes it a little easier on you all. But if you have a distributor, it sounds like then it could be more difficult because I've heard of publishers who went out of business because they had whatever 1,000 book returns, and they were like, "Oh my God, we didn't budget for this." So, is there a solution other than a publisher being always in control of every book sold?
I mean, this is a major reason, an incentive to manage your own distribution, honestly, but there's lots of solutions. I mean, you can choke inventory for, because a lot of times it's not malintent or it's not even that you're at odds with your distributor. It's that they just manage so many titles and so many publishers that if they get an order that's like illogical, like too many copies sold to a party that is going, say like Costco orders 10,000 copies of a book,
Hmm.
everybody sort of knows that they're going to return 9,000 of those. That's like generally understood in the industry. But your distributor might be too busy being like worrying about their new bestseller that they're just processing orders on automation, or they're not going to look at your inventory levels the way that you would when they're filling orders. So what happened a lot for us is that, we would have a new book and, we would print the print run, and then we would get, some big orders. And then the small stores that are actually going to sell through those books aren't getting copies because all the inventory is allocated to the bigger, the bulk, the 10, 5 to 10 largest customers in the industry, who are all, let's face it, going to return some percentage of those copies ordered. So it's, I mean, I feel like this is the other reason this is a no-brainer, that if you handle that in-house, you don't have to negotiate that. But, when we did it, what we would do is we would short print books intentionally to force, each vendor to get 60 or 70% of how many copies they had ordered, because everybody is sort of trying to hedge their bets in
Hmm.
both directions,
Hmm.
because it's not their money that they're betting with, it's your money.
Hmm.
So they would, and a wholesaler will stock up to have copies for when they get orders, especially if the book is sold out at your distributor, then they have to order from the wholesaler.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, is that like, let's say they got the 10,000 order, like, is that a conversation you can have with your distributor? And like, can you catch them and go, "Hey, real quick, can we just do 1,000?" Like, is that possible? Or is there something in the contract where like you don't really have a say about stuff like that?
In theory, yes. In reality, kind of. It's more
Uh,
that for a lot of those sales, it doesn't work if you're choking it that far. Because what happens is if you take it from 10,000 down to 1,000, they don't know which stores to put it into and which to, not put it into. So what'll happen, uh, not to date myself, but we had an order from like Spencer Gifts, and they have a smarter system where they have what they call a test buy, where they buy 500 or something, and they like put them on key stores in urban areas, or I don't know, maybe suburban areas, depending on the book. And then, they're putting 6 in each store. And then if the book works, then they'll go national with it, whereas like most of the big box, stores, Hudson News is another one. If you hang out in airports and train stations like I do, that, they really, if you look at what they have there, they have a certain kind of book,
mm,
and some of those books do very well, but like most are just going to get big orders and big returns.
mm,
So, but then the other problem is, you can have a conversation with your distributor. You can say like, "Hi, I just saw this order come in for this really big number, and that's
mm,
really exciting. But is there anything we can do to get that risk a little bit more manageable so I don't, go out of business? And sometimes, you'll get the I'm really busy response and,
Mm,
which is valid. We're all really busy.
mm,
And sometimes you get the no, that's a condition of sale. We have to give them that many.
mm.
And sometimes, you'll get the yes, like, let's see what we can do. Let's have a conversation. And, a good distributor, and there are good distributors, like I don't, like I feel I have like great relationships with most of our previous distributors, even to this day.
Mhm.
What they'll do is they will, when they get a massive order like that, they will come back to you as step one and they will say, hey, this is really exciting, but this is what it means.
Mm.
Like, do you want this risk? This is the best, worst, and most likely outcome of this situation. What do you want to do?
Yeah, and to your point, I don't want to malign traditional distributors because they absolutely provide a certain service, and there are times when it can work, which I did want to ask you about, and also they're a business, so they're trying to stay in business, and I wanted to ask to that degree, then there are certain fees distributors charge, and I do know that it cuts into publisher profits. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts are in terms of like how can distributors still make money as a business, but publishers still be able to make enough money off of all of it because so many people are taking a cut. The printers, the distributors. Next thing you know, you get back to the publisher and it's like, here's $1. And you're like, what?
Right.
That was 30
Right.
bucks. What happened to it? So,
Right.
how any way that those fees can be adjusted at all, or is this really what they have to charge?
Yeah, I mean, there's not a lot that can be done because your distributor is paying your commission sales reps. They're paying their own staff. They're paying their warehousing costs. They're paying for services like Edelweiss, which is like a discoverability online digital cataloging tool. They're paying for, essentially like what are their staff that train the publishers that like service as a publisher education role like the IBPA, but in a much more in the moment, like here's what's going on with you right now, or here's what's going on with some of our other client publishers that may be pertinent to you later this year. And or like they work on with publishers on development. So they'll say like if you did this, we would be able to sell it in these markets. If you developed your books a little bit differently, we think we could get a lot more traction. So for us, they always said that we were so niche and so, we were so subversive that we were essentially limiting ourselves.
Hmm.
And then, but it seemed more to do with that was how it was viewed or being sold or, any number of other factors. But the trouble of it is that, that's it's a pretty bottom heavy operational business model, and it's the difference between, you have a fixed expenses and you have variable expenses. So, if you have somebody that you pay salary every month, you have to pay them that salary regardless of what happens.
Mm.
Versus when you have a distributor, you pay them a percentage of sale, a percentage of return, and then now they've introduced like storage and warehousing fees and things that like I didn't have to deal with in my day. Not again, not to sound middle-aged, but so those things, the good news of that model is if you don't sell, you don't pay, you know, but also the trouble of it is similarly that, for most publishers with a distributor, they're reliant on that check every month to pay all of their operating expenses, to pay their printer, to pay their staff, to pay themselves, to pay their rent, things like that. So there's not a lot to be done, but it's more a matter of like appreciating the benefits and nature of both models and leaning on the one that suits you the most.
Yeah, because and so I did want to ask. I mean, there are times when working with a traditional distributor might be to great benefit of an indie publisher. I wanted to see if what are some of those reasons why they should work with a traditional distributor?
So, when I was researching the People's Guide to Publishing book, I had just like launched this, we had just like created our own distribution, run out of our own warehouse. And, I was really like ready to evangelize that model. And then I talked to these publishers that actually had made it work very, very well with their distributor relationship. So the one that was the most compelling was Haymarket Books, who is a Chicago publisher, and they do essentially like clockwork political books. And so, their books sell very well in tandem with each other. They don't need to have to reinvent their marketing with every new book. They don't need to reinvent themselves or do a ton of research. The salespeople can essentially like reapproach the stores and simply say, here are the new Haymarket titles, and that is a very functional model. They publish a lot of books, obviously that the difficulty and the difference there is that for them, most of their books are going to burn very bright when they're new, such as like books about like Palestine or topics like that are like in the news right now. Like any of those books are going to be very big for them. But then what's going to happen is that over a period of years, those books are just going to be dead weight. So like that's is the other up and downside of a distributor is the distributor is never going to like show your old books to your stores. They're never going to say, "Hey, remember this one?" They have too big of a load, so that's just not going to work. And I think part of the problem with us is that we really develop every book to be evergreen. So like the book is as relevant in 10 years as it is the day it comes out. And so we can just get a lot more mileage out of that than we could with the distributor. So we can create our own incentive programs, and we create like a tiered discount so the bookstore, if they buy direct from us and they buy older books, we give them a better deal. And then that incentivizes, so everybody is aligned in that incentive model.
Well, before we get too far off of distribution, I wanted to ask, of course, about small press distribution, your favorite distributor out there, obviously. So, for years, I'd read articles. It seemed that the publishers who were working with them, some of them weren't getting paid from what I read, and it just seemed like things weren't going well for years. And then when they closed, that also, from what I read, was handled very poorly. Suddenly, you've got all these publishers who just one day, boom, no more distributor, and they weren't even able to call SPD. So I just wanted to see your thoughts on the whole thing, why they, didn't, work, but also kind of the bigger issue of we're getting less and less options for independent distributors. So I just wanted to see, like, is this model like how bad is this going to get? Like, are we going to end up with one huge distributor and that's going to be the only choice?
It did seem that way for a while. So to your final question, which is, and I guess that's the thing is like, I never, I guess because of when I came into the industry, I have, I think, a different point of view, and I've, watched all this consolidation, and I had watched how SPD operated, and I talked to those publishers, and honestly, it had always sort of felt like a weird relationship where SPD always charged double what the standard fees were for a distributor. I mean, and literally double. And that's hard to comprehend how you can get away with that. And they were very good at marketing to a certain kind of press. And they really sold themselves under the premise of like, you need us, nobody else would have you. And here we are, and you're very lucky to have us at all, because otherwise you'd have nobody. And
I've heard people do that in relationships.
Hmm.
I'm the only one for you. No one else can make you happy.
Where are
Yeah.
you gonna
Okay.
go? Yeah, no, nobody else would date you. Yes. And so this is, and I have made this comparison myself, and it is difficult to talk to these presses and try and explain to them that, they're of a certain size now. They can find a normal distributor with a normal distribution fee. And a lot of them would kind of espouse the SPD line of like, oh no, nobody would take. And and this has been even working with them now. They're kind of like, oh, well, some of these presses are very small, like you wouldn't understand. And I'm like, I was rejected by SPD on the
Hmm.
premise that our books had no market.
Hmm.
Started the like Microcosm with 0 books. It wasn't like I understand very small and I understand the problem and the solution here. So I don't know. Honestly, I think the most likely outcome here is that publishers are going to find out that, that how much better they could do for themselves. I talked to a number of publishers in the last 3 months that literally said they had never been paid. And in some cases, I asked them how long they've been with SPD, and one of them explained to me that that's not how distribution works. You're just thankful that the books are in stores. And I was like, oh, are the books in stores? And I was like, but they're like selling your books. Like it was just like, it, yes, there was some serious unhealthy relationship vibes going on in a lot of these conversations, and yeah, I'm still a little floored by the logic. And so um I think honestly the important thing here, and that's the other reason I think like co-op distribution would be really awesome for these publishers, is so they can look at it and see the money coming in, understand the work involved, and realize and then own the means of production, so they're not giving away their lunch, just because somebody is like saying that they have to.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're creating really great books, and they, I don't look, I'm not sure what your feelings are about capitalism, but like I do think that you should be able to, if you're an artist, get paid to create your art. And I don't think that we should feel guilty that what these amazing books that we're creating, that we're getting paid so that we're able to stay in business. So I do hope they're able to find new homes where they're treated better, and that they're able to make a career out of, because some of them might, have to go out of business now, and that's very sad to me. So anyway, so I thank you for your thoughts on that. Before we leave, there's two topics I want to talk about. You've talked very much about your decision as Microcosm Publishing not to be on Amazon. So other people can read elsewhere your thoughts on why. But you've been successful at not having your books sold through Amazon. And I wanted to see your thoughts, though, for the publishers listening, how they can possibly scale that for them, because Amazon does have a very large share of the market. And like somebody who's just starting out, in terms of discoverability, how can they possibly not sell their books where so many readers are buying books?
Right. And it's more about doing what's right for you and the way that your model or mechanism can work. It's not so much, and I think it's getting lost in the perspective of like pro or con, Amazon or not, like,
Mm,
guilt and all that. I think it's the reality is there's tens of thousands of independent retailers in the United States, and they make much better companions for books than Amazon does. I mean, I say it's like, and you had mentioned at the head of the program about like being listed on Ingram
mm,
versus having a distributor,
mm,
and I think of that as like being on Amazon versus being in stores.
mm,
It's like it's like the scene in The Jerk where he's like, I'm listed in the phone book. I exist, but it doesn't mean that anybody's calling you,
Mhm.
And so I think about, and every strategy really comes down to like, why do people care? How do you get the word out to the people that would care? And like, why do they care? And when you build a strategy, you're like, your capacity is really the major shift. And so our, the thing that made it work for us is that instead of putting all of our time and energy and effort and capacity into like managing our distributor to try and like correct or address Amazon listings or any other mistake or problem, we went over here and we said, oh, look, aren't there like 12,000 independent stores? Like, wouldn't that be a much better use of our
Mm,
time? And, when we first made that decision, our the same key accounts sales manager who suggested we do this in the first place, she talked to Publishers Weekly and she pointed out that we had three independent stores
mm,
that did more business with us in a year than Amazon did.
mhm,
And that was before, we made this major shift.
mm,
And, so I'd say like start local, build those relationships because as you grow, Amazon is going to become a disproportionately large amount of both your focus and your sales.
mm,
And, so it's more like once you get up to speed, you're going to see the negative impacts of that more and more.
mm, mm,
But it's
mhm.
how you build from the start that like creates your model. So your model has to like make sense to the people that love your books as much as, so the way you publish as much as what you publish.
Yeah, and the other thing I feel really bad about, we get members who email us. Amazon has control over their account, and they say they are accusing me of like not having the copyright of my own book. They've shut down my account, and I can't get anybody, and they're now just losing sales, and and I just feel terrible for them because it's so hard to get issues like that resolved because it's hard to get in touch with anyone at Amazon who can resolve it or cares to resolve it.
Yeah, I was gonna say,
So
yeah.
yeah, so you're in charge as the publisher, as Microcosm. It seems like you are in so much more control over all of this. So, that's to your benefit. Although, you have to fulfill and warehouse all your books. So I'm sure that was, clearly you're able to make it work, but that was also a decision you all had to make and that you were capable of doing that.
Right, yeah. And then, we were around for 20 something, I don't know, 22, no, more than that. Yeah, 22 years when we made that decision. So we had a lot of infrastructure that somebody starting out wouldn't.
Mhm.
But I mean, I would also point out that's how we started out, was doing
Mm,
it that way too. It's
mm,
like I would go knock on doors and go to the local like record store and explain to them what we do, and then they would be like, oh yeah, that's cool, yeah, we can try that. And I mean, that's publishing. Now we call
mhm,
that special sales, but it's all the same. And yeah, like I say that it's not worth having a conversation with somebody that you like can't have a conversation with,
mm.
or like where the power imbalance is so striking that they're just going to impose their way upon you.
Well, before we go, I do want to make sure that we mention Working Lit.
Oh,
You
yes.
all recently launched that, and it's a great help to indie publishers. So, are you able just to explain what it is, how it helps publishers, and then how they can take advantage of it?
Sure. So we created this in 2001. And this is honestly, we did it for these reasons. We needed to solve the same problems that every publisher does. We needed a way to keep our book data. We needed a way to like manage our invoicing and to know our inventory and to know when we needed to reprint things. So gradually, we had the person that made it still works here. And, we said, can it do this? Can we have it like manage all of our customer records? Can we have it manage, like sending them reminders when it's time to pay their bills? Can we have them, can it send out royalties to our authors? And then gradually we realized that by requesting features over 20 something years, we had in turn built a piece of software. And we thought that would be something that would be of use and appreciated by other publishers. And, in talking, so we made the commercial version in the past year, and we rebuilt the stack to be in a modern language because, well, that's important too. And so this is a major reason. Like, so this runs our warehouse. It does, essentially all aspects of, it sends our book data information to the industry through a process called Onyx, which is how, you know, when you're Ingram, you're taking our title data and then you're propagating that data to, they have a little system that all of the independent bookstores take from Ingram, and so then they get the data that way. And then everybody else that sells books also pulls our data feed. And a lot of the royalty piece, the data piece, the export piece, the billing piece, there's no other system that does all of that. And that sounds really preposterous to say, but, if you were to get software that could do all of that, you would be spending $1 million.
Mhm.
And that's, or 1.5 million, actually, according to numbers I pulled a few months ago.
Hmm.
And so, which, like, and who has that kind of money?
I
So
mean, I do, but most people don't, and I
can
feel
I
bad
get
for
a
them.
loan? And so, we made this, so it could, as the publishers grew, they would have more, we could start at free, and then as they have more and more books, we can like gradually have the publishers support the cost of developing the software. And we built it as a cooperative, so the publishers would own the software. So when you're a working lit user and you're paying in, you're building equity. And then that's how, and then we pull the members and we say, oh, what are the new features that would benefit you the most? Like, what would you like to see? What would be useful for you? And, so it's kind of like a live experiment in development. And, because honestly, like, this is what made us the fastest growing publisher and put us on the list the following 2 years as well. It's like, we can use this to hone our marketing and, look at like when a customer is due to reorder some more books. We can do all these things as fast as like we can come up with new ideas for things that could do for us. And we want that to like, raise the tide for everybody, because the independents are literally a larger portion of the market than the big five are now. And, so like we should have the tools and the toys to show it.
Well, I just love that you all, are like you were saying, a co-op. Like, it's so great that you're sharing this and that it's something that's been successful for you all, and that, you're a type of business that you're like, hey, let's all work together. And I think that is definitely the spirit of indie publishers. So, it's workinglit.com. People can check it out. And some little inside information. I am going to be talking to someone on your team to see what we can do to hopefully provide access to it for our members, and talk about how that could be a member benefit. So, but yeah, I'm just grateful that you all are sharing this with other indie publishers.
That's not why we made it, but that's why we're making it bigger.
You should be like, we're just great. We're just generous, and you just take all the compliments.
Oh,
Um,
yes. Thank you. That's what I should say.
So Joe, this is great. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me. So much information here. Everyone should definitely check out Microcosm Publishing's books, microcosmpublishing.com. And I really appreciate, again, workinglit.com. Check that out. So thanks again, Joe, for being on the show. We really appreciate it.
Thank
And
you. This is great.
yeah.
And I love the IBPA. I love the forward thinking within your organization. That's like all I've wanted for, my entire career.
Well, I'll take the compliment too. Thank you. Um, for more information on all the benefits of being an IBPA member, make sure to visit ibpa-online.org. Also, make sure to subscribe to this podcast. We drop a new episode on YouTube and everywhere you normally download podcasts the last Thursday of every month. Joe, thank you again. I hope you have a wonderful day, and thank you everyone for listening.